Question number 6, the Honourable Annette King.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question's to the Prime Minister. Does he stand by his statement regarding the Northland by-election that, quote, last week we were looking through the various policies we want to announce, so they were finalised, I suppose, last week. We've got another couple of announcements. We're making another this week on something else.
Right, Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, those statements I made as Leader of the National Party, there is no ministerial responsibility for the comments I make in that capacity. But, Mr Speaker, I intend, Mr Speaker, to reserve my long-term position, as did Helen Clark, of not answering questions undertaken in my capacity as Leader of the National Party. But because the Clerk of the House has allowed the primary question through and as a courtesy to the House, I'll answer it. The answer in my capacity as Leader of the National Party is yes.
Point of order, Mr Speaker.
Point of order, the Honourable...
Mr Speaker, I took the quote not from the Leader of the National Party but from the Prime Minister's post-Cabinet conference. He didn't do it as the National Party, he did it as the Prime Minister.
Order. The point of order.
I'll hear from the right Honourable
Mr Speaker, it's quite clear actually, and has been established over quite some time, that comments that I might make at my post-Cabinet press conference are made in a variety of different capacities. I make them in my capacity as Prime Minister, I make them in my capacity as Leader of the Party. In fact, I have no doubt that next Monday I'll be answering questions in my capacity as New Zealand's home handyman, Bunny Rygold too.
Order. 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 This is an important matter. Order. This is an important matter, and the line between Prime Minister answering in a Prime Ministerial capacity or as a Leader of a political party is one that is not easy to decipher on some occasions. On this particular occasion, the question was taken as a quote from the Prime Minister's press conference. The Prime Minister is certainly then free to answer it the way he did, but I don't think anyone could sensibly argue that it was not a legitimate question and that the quote came from a press conference held by the Prime Minister in his capacity as Prime Minister. Further supplementary?
Supplementary, Mr Speaker.
Point of order, the right Honourable
Speaker,
Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, I'd urge you to reflect on those comments later on, because the important point here is every week I do a post-Cabinet press conference. It's actually post-Cabinet press conference. Now, obviously on many occasions I answer those questions as Prime Minister. I also answer questions, as I legitimately said, as Leader of the National Party. I'm answered many questions in that regard. I also answer them as a citizen, as a father and as a husband. But Mr Speaker, if your ruling is to stand that comments I make at my post-Cabinet press conference are only ones that will always be interpreted as those as Prime Minister, I would have to inform members of the press gallery that I will only be answering questions that are in my Prime Ministerial capacity.
Prime Minister resume his seat. The question I was responding to is whether the question is in order. If the question takes a quote from a Prime Ministerial press conference subsequent to a Cabinet meeting, then in my opinion such a quote means that it's a legitimate question. As to the way the Prime Minister then chooses to answer the question is entirely his decision. I'm not in any way arguing against the answer that was given by the Prime Minister, but I'm certainly saying on this occasion that the question was a legitimate question to be accepted in the first place. I'll hear from the Honourable David Parker.
Mr Speaker, in making such rulings in the future too, I would submit that where the Prime Minister is answering questions about the spending of money that comes from New Zealanders through taxes and levies that he spends through the authority of this Parliament, he is almost certainly speaking as Prime Minister.
And I'll consider that at the time the right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, we can have a debate over the merits or otherwise of whether something is policy.
Order. I just want to be clear. This is another point of order. I will be hearing it in silence.
So, Mr Speaker, we can have that debate, obviously the Clerk of the House has allowed the question. On that basis I'm more than happy to answer the question as I said. But I'll just go back to this point that I'd ask you later on to review that, because if you are saying that every comment I make at my post-Cabinet press conference could legitimately be used as a statement that could be referred to in the House, it's a very different matter.
The Prime Minister will resume his seat. We've covered this ground before. I'm not in any way critical of the answer. I'm simply saying the question was in order. It is the Prime Minister's job to justify any comments that he makes in what capacity he makes them. That is a matter for the Prime Minister. Further supplementaries? Order. Point of order, the Honourable Trevor Mallard.
Mr Speaker, and this is not in any way to dispute your ruling, but to point out to the House that there is considerable written material on this question from the Ombudsperson, but to indicate, given the primacy of this House, it is for you and not for the Ombudsman to decide what is relevant for the Prime Minister to answer.
Further supplementary. Point of order, the Honourable Jerry Brownlee.
Mr Speaker, I'm only making a comment because Mr Mallard has tried to imply that there is something that members of the House should go and look for to get guidance on this. I would add to that they should go and look at the Hansards from the 2nd of August 2005 and subsequent days, where in fact the then Prime Minister, Helen Clark, used exactly the same language that the Prime Minister has made and made it very, very clear and had it accepted by the then Speaker that there were occasions where she may be, on the one hand, at that moment in her official capacity, but then because of the question asked and the answer given, acting in her capacity as a leader of the party. And the Labor Party need to realise that it was they who set that precedent.
Order. And if members are inclined... Order. Order.
And that
order,
was indeed
order, and the
taxpayer
member
money.
Will resume his seat. If members are inclined to do further homework, they can also look at Hansard's of 21 February 2006, where a very similar argument eventuated in this House. It's interesting to note that those proponents for the argument on that particular case were on the other side of the House. Supplementary question.
This is just a nonsense.
Order, can I just clarify? This is continuing to relitigate the matter that is creating disorder.
No. Mr Speaker, I'm not wishing to relitigate the matter, but what I am asking, and what I've asked on a couple of occasions, and I don't think you actually have answered, is for you to go away and actually give us a ruling, because the way I interpret your current statements, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that if I make a statement at a post-cabinet press conference, then that will always be allowable as a question into the House. And my point to you, sir, is that I do those press conferences wearing a number of hats. That's been a very legitimate process. Now, the clerk has determined that this particular question, for a variety of reasons, fits the category of me speaking in my capacity as Prime Minister. I can debate that point, but I accept that point of the clerk. But my main point is I do think you should give this House a written ruling on, otherwise every question I answer at a post-cabinet press conference could be subject to a primary question, and I don't think that would be correct.
And I think the Prime Minister makes reasonable points of point, and I get this wrong. I will give consideration to it further, but I'm certainly not saying that simply because the answer is given at a press conference subsequent to Cabinet that it'll automatically be a legitimate question. I'm saying that on this particular occasion, when I study the transcripts very, very carefully, aware that there was some dispute about whether this was a legitimate question, I am quite satisfied that the question on this occasion was legitimate, and I'm equally saying I'm quite happy or comfortable that the Prime Minister, in giving the answer he gave, addressed the question. Supplementary question,
Mr.
the Honourable
Speaker.
Annette King.
Does he think it's important to be straight with the people of Northland when talking about government spending in Northland, Mr. Joyce? If so, why has he... Mr. Speaker, I can't even hear myself.
Well, it would help if the member could ask a concise question.
I'm asking a precise question, and will I start again?
Well, unfortunately, I think the member will have to start again, but that will unlikely be a concise question.
Yeah,
but
thank you.
If the member would just continue.
Does he think it's important to be straight with the people of Northland when talking about government expenditure in Northland? If so, why has he claimed his government has spent $750 million on roads in Northland when $240 million of the funding came from Labor's 2007-8 budget, 2008-9 budget?
Order. The question now is far too long. Well, I'm saying it is.
Mr. Speaker.
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, because I'm advised it's correct, and secondly, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, if Labor care so much about Northland, maybe they'd like to tell us which candidate they're voting for. Willow, Jean or Winston? It's pretty simple, just answer the question.
Order.
Supplementary question.
Order.
Mr. Speaker.
Order. Supplementary question, the Honourable Annette King.
Mr Speaker, is it honest to claim 30% of funding from a previous government's budget as your own contribution to roads in Northland in an effort to get votes, while at the same time claiming that this government is spending 40% more? Couldn't that be called chicanery?
Mr Speaker.
All right, Honourable Prime Minister.
Is it honest, Mr Speaker, to criticise a political party for instance, finding an accommodation with the ACT Party or United Future, but then to be in exactly the same situation and to, quote unquote, be so confused about who you would vote for as the leader of the political party that you can't work out whether you'd vote for your own candidate or Winston Peters? Mr Speaker, if someone needs to be straight, it's Andrew Little with the voters of Northland.
Supplementary question, Mr Speaker.
Supplementary question, Honourable
Mr Speaker,
Annette
when
King.
he told reporters yesterday he, quote, assumed that all 10 bridges promised in Northland were justified on a cost-benefit analysis, have his minders subsequently told him only 3 were mentioned in the Northland Regional Land Transport Plan over the next 6 years, and only 1 of the 3 could manage a medium priority rating? And wouldn't that be called duplicity?
Mr Speaker,
Right, Honourable Prime
what is
Minister.
becoming quite clear is that Labor are opposed to the 10 bridges in Northland. I tell you what, if this keeps up, by the end of the day, Willow Jean won't be voting for Winston, she'll be voting for Mark Osborne.
Supplementary question, Mr Speaker.
No one else is.
Supplementary question. Order. Order. Supplementary question, Tracy Martin.
Kia ora. To the Prime Minister. How many ministers and backbench National Party MPs have visited Northland to promote these new policies and put up signs since the TV3 poll, and how does that compare to the number of ministers and backbench MPs who have visited Northland in the 5 months?
Order. I can't now hear the second part of the first of the question, but the first part, there is no prime ministerial responsibility for that. Supplementary question. Point of order, Chris Hipkins.
Point of order. There were 2 parts to Tracy Martin's questions. One was around ministers and ministers visiting Northland, for which there is prime ministerial responsibility. I
not for
accept
backbenchers.
but you could rule that part out of order potentially, but it would be impossible to rule out ministers.
I'll tell you how we'll make progress here. We'll have a bit more silence so I can hear the question. The member can ask 1 supplementary question. If there's an element of it that I don't think is relevant, then we'll rule it out of order. Tracy Martin.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. How many ministers have visited Northland to promote the new policies and put up signs since the TV3 poll compared to the number of ministers that visited Northland in the 5 months prior to March 2015?
Right, Honourable Prime Minister.
Well, Mr Speaker, I'd have to go and check so I can assure the House, but I'm pretty sure it would be a lot more in the 5 months prior. But Mr Speaker, the interesting fact, of course, is the member's having to ask that question because her leader, on the taxpayer, is up there campaigning in Northland. He's campaigning for Labor voters, I have no doubt, but he's nevertheless...
Point of order. Point of order.
The question was addressed in the first part of the Prime Minister's answer. Supplementary.
Point of order.
Tracy Martin.
Can I...
Order. This is a point of order, or I hope it is.
Can I seek your clarification, Mr Speaker? I believe as a Member of Parliament I have every right to ask a question, and it is regardless of who is in my party on the day or not.
Order. That's not a point of order. The member asked how many ministers have been up there recently compared with the last 5 months, and the Prime Minister said he didn't have that number with him. Question is addressed.
Point of order, Mr Speaker.
Order. This is hopefully a point of order.
It is indeed a point of order, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, there is a clear ruling around referring to the absence of members from the chamber, which the Prime Minister has just violated. His answer was actually out of order.
And that is true. No member should refer to the absence of another member. That is true. Supplementary question, the Honourable...
I don't need to go to the gym, Mr Speaker. Supplementary question, Mr Speaker. Could the Prime Minister tell the House when does politicking for a by-election cross over to being a bribe to buy an election? For example, when an unelected private citizen gets to announce... I can't hear myself. For example, when an unelected private citizen gets to announce $69 million of taxpayers' money aimed at getting in votes in 19 days.
Member resume his seat. The first part of the question can be answered.
Mr Speaker, the answer is very clear. 0% student loans.
Supplementary question, Mr Speaker. Supplementary question. It was actually announced by a Prime Minister who didn't hide behind a party.
Order. Now, I'm about to move on. If the member got further supplementary...
One more, Mr Speaker.
The member will resume her seat. I'll allow her to continue to ask simple, concise, supplementary questions, but if we're going to have speeches, then I'm going to curtail the question and move to the next one.
Point of order, Mr Speaker.
Point of order.
Mr Speaker, at the end of question time, I'd like you to... In fact, I'll hand the questions over to you, because you will find the questions
the member will
are
resume
not
her seat. My patience will evaporate very quickly with that member. She will be leaving the chamber early unless she continues to ask concise supplementary questions in line with standing orders. Honourable Annette King.
Supplementary question.
Supplementary
Mr.
question,
Speaker.
Annette King.
If you could hear it. How would Transparency International rate a government on the Corruption Perception Index, who used taxpayers' money 19 days out from an election to fund projects that are independently rate them as very, very bottom of a priority list?
Right, Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, I think the member actually needs to take a step back and, yes, take a long breath, because political parties campaign on policies. Voters expect to know what parties are going to do. Mr Speaker, I go back to 0% loans. Does the member remember that? I remember Trevor Mallard turning up sick as a parrot because the Ombudsman actually released the dodgy costings the Labor Party had done and wouldn't release them in the public domain before the 2005 election.
Question number 7, Barbara Kiriga.
Mr Speaker, my question is to the Minister.